Hey class, I wanted to walk through the last question on quiz 6. Um, so you should see that this first statement is the conclusion. Um, and also notice that this last statement is basically saying exactly the same thing, right? So I think we should do away with it, i.e., I think we should abolish it, being the Electoral College. Um, these are the exact same statements. The only difference is that there's this guarding term used. So I think we should do away with it. In section 110 of the textbook, I talk about guarding terms, and that's all this is, right? So we can take that out because really the proposition being asserted is we should do away with it. That is, we should abolish the Electoral College. So that's the conclusion here. So let's just drop that into a new slide here. So that'll be our main conclusion. So the crucial premise here is this normative one that says everyone's vote should count the same, right? Or you could imagine it saying everyone's vote ought to count the same. It's a normative statement, which I talk about again in the textbook. So we're going to drop that in to this. And we know that in some way that this statement, even though there's no conclusion no premise indicator here, we know that this statement is supposed to be supporting this main conclusion. So everyone's votes should count the same. This statement is basically telling us that the Electoral College doesn't do that, right? It's telling us that the votes of those in small states count for more than those in large states. So let's just put that in as our second premise here. And what I'd like to suggest is that we can make the conclusion follow kind of even more clearly in a logical way if we interject a little intermediate conclusion here. So if it's true that the Electoral College counts those the votes of those who live in smaller states as for more than those who live in larger states, then it would follow that the Electoral College does not count everyone's votes the same. And that would just follow from that line 2, right? If you think, you got to think about the logic here, right? If this is true, right, then of course this would be true. That's the idea. So our line 3 here, we're saying, is following from our line 2. Okay, so once we've got that, look at lines 1 and 3 now. Everyone's votes should count the same. The Electoral College does not count everyone's votes the same. And really, you can see that the conclusion is supposed to follow from those two facts, that the conflict between what should be the case and what isn't the case, right? But there's another assumption that I think is needed here, and there's a couple ways we could kind of fill this out. One is that we could say, think about what 1 and 3 show. If something should be the case, but it's not the case, especially in this case of the Electoral College, it seems to be getting at an issue of justice or fairness, right? So one of the things we could do is we could just say, therefore, the Electoral College is unfair. And that would follow from 1 and 3. And finally, how do we get from the fact that the Electoral College is unfair to the fact that it should be abolished? Well, there's a really clear way we can do this, and it would just be by this missing premise. It would say something like, any unfair things should be abolished. And that would be this is just clearly a missing premise. The line before we just introduced as a kind of intermediate conclusion, which you can also do. And the whole point of this is to make the logic clear. Now, of course, We haven't cited what the main conclusion follows from here, but now in our reconstructed argument, it would just follow from 4 and 5. The Electoral College is unfair. Any unfair thing should be abolished. Therefore, the Electoral College should be abolished. You should see that the logic of that now is pretty airtight, given the way we've reconstructed it. So the only other kind of question here is, how does this fit in? That's how Bush won the election many elections ago, even though Al Gore got more votes. What is this supposed to be doing? Well, in some way, it's supposed to be supporting or giving evidence for why this is true, right? But it's doing it in an interesting way. It's actually supposed to, the idea is that this is supposed to explain, that's how, or that's why, you can imagine, it's supposed to explain why Bush won the election, even though Gore got more votes. So Gore won the popular vote, but Bush won the election because of the Electoral College. Of course, this has happened many times since this election. So what's really going on here is the fact that this is supposed to explain this is giving us reason to accept that it's basically like what's called an inference to the best explanation, which we'll get to in Chapter 3. But what I want you to understand is that really, in the end, it's supposed to be this fact that is helping, because it's explained by the way the Electoral College works, helps reinforce that this is, in fact, how the Electoral College works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take that and copy it and put it into our structure here. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Let me undo that. There we go. So here, what we have then is 2 should follow from 1. I'm going to have to redo the numbering here because now everything's switched. What I want to switch this to is just this, because that's just basically a certain kind of premise or conclusion indicator here. So Bush won the election even though Gore got more votes, which is supposed to support this. Oops, sorry. No, I've just done that wrong. Let's try that again. We don't want that. What it's supporting is 2 here, so there we go. Like this. Let's see, the Electoral College counts the votes. I'm going to rephrase this a little bit differently. Of those who live in smaller states for more than those who live in larger states. And that's supposed to follow now from 2. And let's fix this up. This is not following from anything, of course. It's just an independent premise. We've got to make this follow from 3 now, like this. And then this, if we look at our revised lines now, is following from 1 and 4 now. And then the main conclusion is following from 5 and 6. So, oops, that's one way of reconstructing this argument.